right, what is up, guys? This is the first Red Top live stream with me, Joe Enders, your host, that you're constantly doing. We're going to be doing more of these live streams in the future, and honestly, I'm really excited to be able to start coming to you live so I can get your comments, get your concerns, get everything that you want to hear. You can always send us super chats. You can do all sorts of things like that to get this content available to you so you can be heard, so I can hear you, so I can respond to you guys. But one of the things that I've been looking at recently, this started coming up today, is Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil seems to be going on like a tirade right now. What's up, Lucas, H4CG? Welcome to the stream. Glad to see that you're here right now. Yeah, so I was just talking about it. It's like this thing with Dr. Phil is going on right now. Like, is he like getting based or something? Like, what's going on? Like, he's doing these interviews and stuff. He's like arguing with leftists, and he's specifically talking about like the decay in family values. So one of the things that I wanted to do is just take a look at some of these videos right now, and let's just transition over to the browser real quick so we can look. Yeah, I can see you in the chats, bro. So let's just check in Twitter right now. This was the first thing that like set off alarm bells with people. So Benny Johnson tweeted this, but he says Dr. Phil leaves hosts on the view in stunned silence after schooling them on lockdown. So let's just react to this a little bit and see what you guys think.
Like 08, 09, smartphones came on, and kids stopped living their lives and started watching people live their lives. And so we saw the biggest spike and the highest levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality since records have ever been kept.
Yeah, I actually saw this study when it came out. And what was so crazy about it was that it's like in the 40% range with like Gen Z people like feeling depressed, having suicidal thoughts, like all sorts of other things. These are like in the high 30s, high 40% range. So like it's just been, I mean, just completely insane dealing with these mental issues with these young people, and a lot of people do connect it to isolation. And the COVID lockdowns obviously didn't help with that at all. Don't ban me for that one, YouTube.
And it's just continued on and on and on. And then COVID hits 10 years later, and the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that? Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it?
Like, does anybody think that Dr. Phil would be the one, like, raising the alarm bell on this sort of thing? I'm actually pretty impressed, to be honest with you.
Down. And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch, and referrals dropped 50 to
So there was also a pandemic going on. They were trying to save
kids' lives. Remember, we know a lot of folks who died during this. So it wasn't, people weren't laying around eating bond, but, well, you know what? We're lucky. Maybe we're lucky they didn't, because we kept them out of the places that they could be sick, because no one wanted to believe we had an issue.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group.
Yeah, this is such a stupid point that they're making right now. Even while the lockdowns were happening, like, COVID was never a deadly virus for children. It was, you know, I mean, there are children that may have died from who had pre-existing conditions because of it, but as far as it like being detrimental, the younger you were, the higher the survival rate it was with COVID. So to say that, yeah, that's nonsense. That's just nonsense. Like that they would even make that they make that argument. And this is why I think this is what Dr. Phil's about to say is like, what was worse? You know, the mental illnesses that resulted from all this from all this lockdown nonsense, or the, you know, people with pre-existing conditions, you know, that were vulnerable at a young age that could have potentially died from it. And when you look at it, you know, when you look at it from that perspective, it's obvious that the mental illness is a bigger problem. You have a generation of isolated people that have mental illnesses. That's not going to be good for civilization. It's not going to be good for society.
They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
Well, Phil?
Oh yeah, I mean,
like 08, 09.
That's the wild aspect of this whole thing. So, I mean, like I said, I was never expecting to hear this sort of thing from Dr. Phil. Like, I would have never in a million years have thought that I'd be hearing Dr. Phil be the one blowing the whistle on these things. They're like, no, have you seen Dr. Phil's eyes? Yeah. I don't know if you're the only person here or not, dude, to be honest with you. But, you know, we're just starting. This is like the first stream that we've done. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this one's got like low turnout with people coming in and whatnot. But I'm testing out the software. I'm doing a quick little video reaction to, you know, this like I said, this Dr. Phil fiasco. And honestly, like, I'm telling you, wait till I show you this next thing that's coming up, though. You're gonna be pretty surprised by this one. So this next one that we have, let's transition over, is this one right here. He got interviewed by this left-wing guy, David Pakman. A lot of people have heard of him before. He's not nobody. I mean, I'll put it that way. So, you know, anyways, here he is right now interviewing Dr. Phil.
Today we'll be speaking with Phil McGraw, also known as Dr. Phil, host of Dr. Phil Prime Time on Merritt Street Media, and author of the new book, We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity. You know, I'm very interested to speak to you today because in preparation for our interview, I've been watching some of the Fox News appearances, looking at the book, etc. I never really saw you as a guy who delved into political issues per se. You seem more willing, interested, and I must say, maybe more conservative than I thought you were. Is that a fair assessment?
Not at all.
Okay.
Because I am so not political, you can't even believe it. And I'll tell you why. I know nothing about politics. And, and I know why you say that. It sounds like it.
Right.
I talk about these things as cultural issues.
See, this is, you know, and this is him kind of trying to distance himself. By the way, welcome to the stream, Noel. Or Noel. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to try my best, but thank you. Welcome to the stream. This is our first Red Top stream. So we're reacting to all this stuff live. So we're talking about Dr. Phil right now. I mean, is this guy taking the red pill? Is this guy, I don't want to use that word anymore because the red pill guys have corrupted it and making it. But anyways, he's trying to separate politics from culture. But let's be honest. I mean, you have culture and politics, and they're intrinsically connected. I mean, like what a nation is directed by its culture. You know, the cult that it derives from, and that's typically, you know, culture is downstream from religion. So, I mean, no, I wouldn't agree with that. But Dr. Phil kind of says that without saying it in this interview. So, well, I mean, red pill, obviously, over blue pill. Like, come on. But anyways, let's have him continue here.
From a psychological, psychosocial standpoint, how they affect families and people. And they do overlap with some of the things that politicians talk about, but they talk about it from a political standpoint, funding standpoint, how they can get this bill or that bill through. Couldn't care less. But I am interested.
But that's not the only issue, Dr. Phil. The other issue is it's not all about funding. It's about protecting children, protecting their purity, protecting their innocence, protecting their family units so they're strong, they're put together and things like that. Like politics can serve those ends. It can orient itself towards doing those things. So this is, I do disagree with them here, but like I said, when you hear what he says later on, it's different.
In those issues in terms of how they impact families
with me, Joe Enders, your host, that you're constantly doing. We're going to be doing more of these live streams in the future. And honestly, I'm really excited to be able to start coming to you live so I can get your comments,
so there's a lot of overlap, but I don't talk about it from a political standpoint because I frankly don't know enough about the politics of it all. I'm just willing to admit that. I'm just willing to admit it. I don't think a lot of other people know either. I'm just willing to admit it.
I don't want to make this like, you know, famously there's this story of literary critics were talking about the symbolism in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and he would tell them, that's not at all what I meant. And so I don't want to make this where I tell you about how political all the stuff you say is, but the reason why I say it is a lot of the language in the book and when you talk about issues like immigration and culture and others, it seems as though it alludes to going back to the good old days, individual decisions in the style that many Republicans now talk about with regard to schooling and parenting, et cetera. But you're saying it's just not the case.
No, and that doesn't mean that there aren't politicians on both sides of the aisle that talk about these issues. But if you really think about raising...
No. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but no, they don't do this on both sides. Like, there's one side that is very clearly against families. What they want to do is they want to incentivize single parents, they want to incentivize divorce, they want to incentivize promiscuous sexual behavior that is public for children to see, all these other problems. That is all Democrats. Republicans, even some of them are doing it. I would say there are ones on both sides going against the family, but there is only a small sect of the Republican Party that actually does fight and care about family values.
Raising a family in America, whether it's now or 50 years ago or 20 years down the road, we still have to keep our eye on what I think are core issues in America, and I think the backbone of America is the family unit. I really think...
This was his best point and throughout the whole thing, by the way. When he says that America, the backbone of America is the family, and having strong families is how we reform America. It's how we reform the church. It's how we reform the culture. It's how we reform everything, by building up the family. I think it was Pope John Paul II that said families are the first cell of civilization, or society, I think is the word he used. Which means that, we shouldn't orient our policymaking towards the benefit of individuals and individual prosperity, rather familial prosperity, which is a much more useful way to go about doing this sort of thing. So the fact that he's even coming to this conclusion might lead him down some other logical rabbit holes that are really gonna help him come to some of these more based Republican or these based traditional Christian positions on the family, because he's on to something just by saying that sentence alone.
That if we have strong families, if we have strong family values, and I think that our families in America, as you've heard me say and read me say, are under attack. And I think some of those attacks are unintended consequences of technology, for example. But these are things that, whether politicians talked about them or not, if they tried to legislate about them or not, I would still be talking about.
So give some examples of that. What are some of the attacks facing families?
Well, I think about 08, 09, we had...
See you, Lucas. Thanks for coming in.
The biggest change to human life since the Industrial Revolution. I think before the Industrial Revolution, we were a very agricultural civilization, right? People worked on the farms. We grew what we needed. But then we became mechanized, and I think back then we were 95% agricultural. Now we're 1% agricultural. Why? Because everything is so mechanized and people move to the cities and all. Well, the biggest thing that's happened since then, in my opinion, was the advent of the smartphone. The internet became so prolific. And, I mean, think about it. We're walking around in 08, 09 with as much computing power in our hands, with smartphones, laptops, iPads, that we had when we did the moon shot. When we put a man on the moon, we didn't have as much computing power as we can hold in our hands as of 08, 09, and it changed everything. And people... This
is true. What he's saying is like dead on right now. It's, I guess the way to look at it is that, is this technology good for us or is it not? This was a really old debate. It actually goes back all the way to the Industrial Revolution. They were called the Luddites, and they wanted to destroy technology because they thought the shift from an agricultural economy over to an industrialized economy was bad. Well, we've now even moved beyond the industrialized economy, and now we're moving into the service economy on top of it. And the service economy, obviously the jobs are much worse. They don't pay as well. They don't have as good of benefits. There usually is not collective bargaining for pay in a lot of these jobs. And when there is, it's usually not very good because, these jobs don't put really, the service jobs aren't particularly dangerous. There's not really, unions overall were created to increase workplace safety. And when you have, these like easy service jobs that are very safe, very not very dangerous for anybody to take part in and stuff, unions simply don't have the same pull that they would have as far as negotiating power goes. But beyond even that point of view, what Dr. Phil's saying is that there's been this massive change. And a lot of these technocrats, a lot of these guys in power right now are very, very, very interested in trying to, move beyond the whole service economy and move into a mechanized economy where the machines basically serve us and we live in a socialist communist utopia and we live in our own little virtual bubbles for the entirety of our lives. And obviously I'm against that. I think you can do that as recreation once in a while, but the goal of your life overall is to live a uniquely human experience. You're supposed to live the human experience, and you're supposed to, throughout that human experience, try your best to conform yourself to the divine, which is Jesus Christ incarnate as man, the perfect man. You're supposed to try to be like him. You're trying to move yourself towards that. You're orienting your soul towards perfection, so you could eventually join God in heaven, and be washed in his precious blood and inherit the kingdom of heaven and live there as a perfect and eternal being. So that's sort of a way that you can look at what he's saying from a theological standpoint. But on a technology level, it's a real conversation to have whether this is actually good or not. I think it was Tucker Carlson who was talking to Ben Shapiro one time, and Ben Shapiro, and he said, would I ban automated trucks? He's like, well, yeah, I would do it in a second. And I think that the Luddites are often dismissed as people who, were idiots or stupid or, just against progress and stuff like that. And they had no real reasoning. But there is real reasoning. Industries get destroyed. Lifestyles get destroyed. And when that happens, families wind up suffering probably the most during these constant transition periods. And when you're transitioning and transitioning and transitioning and transitioning, it's really hard to get to a good place.
People stop being so involved with the reality of life and started getting involved in virtual life, and it's only gone more in that direction since that time. And also at that time, we started seeing the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness in young people since records were kept. And
I'm with you on this one. Jonathan Haidt has studied and written about this extensively. You and I are aligned on this one. What about the ones that fall under what you call the tyranny of the fringe? Because I don't think the smartphone example falls under that category, right?
No, that's why I say some of this is the unintended consequences of technology. But then we've got some where we've got people that are just trying to change some of the core values in America.
By the way, we do have super chats set up if you guys are interested in sending any out.
And we've got people that are coming in saying, well, we want to change history. We want to change what kids are being taught in history. We want to change biology. We want to change all of the things that we have for 100 years had empirical data to support.
But tell me more about, I don't want to gloss over this. I really want to understand this. Changing history. Okay, what was the history that used to be taught that now has been changed by the tyranny of the fringe?
Well, pick an area. We can talk about biology, where we have always had two sexes.
But what about history? Now, just to pick history, not biology, because you said history, biology. What about history?
Yeah, so I have a couple problems with that, and I'll mute this while the ad plays. But I have a couple problems with this. I think probably the biggest one is the one that Dr. Phil brings up. It's not like there isn't a history in biology. So I don't know what he means by just history. Well, the history of biology is that we traditionally believed that the sexes were divided by male and female. And it was a binary, and that binary was used towards this. Now they're trying to teach the genders on a spectrum, but I don't know. I would go even further than that, even though I think I froze again, which is fine. I think going further, I would take that to the next level and say that when you look at things like American history, just generally, if he wants to talk about history, like specifically like what you would learn in history class, and you're not going to get a history of biology in history class, most likely. You might touch on it, but no, history class. I mean, good grief, how many curriculums were based on Howard Zinn's book? What was it called? Hold on, let me actually look that up really quick. It's going to be Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. That's what it's called. So, I look at that and it's like, well, if it's A People's History of the United States, that's basically telling history from the perspective of all of the people that America had beaten. It was history told by the losers, not history told by the winners. And, sure, there's a valuable perspective there that we could probably get a different idea from. But if you make that the standard, then the standard is the anti-American standard. So that was a change that was done to our curriculum. Our curriculums used to be vastly more patriotic. It was typically understood, for example, that that slavery was an institution that simply existed at that time. And this is something that Dr. Phil's going to actually talk about, I think, right here.
A big point to pretend that there's not historical biology, but if you want to talk about history, we can not in biology, but just talk about the history of mankind.
Yeah,
we've got areas where they don't want to talk about slavery. We had one group of people that wanted to start describing slavery in history books as involuntary relocation.
right.
This was not.
Yeah, that's not entirely true. What is it? Let me look this up just so I don't mess it up. Yeah, this was in Texas. That's what I thought. So yeah, state education board members push back on proposal to use involuntary relocation to talk about slavery. I mean, this was about a second grade curriculum. I don't really think that in second grade you should be learning about like harsh institutions like slavery, and they were probably just lightening the language to not like traumatize little children and say like, oh yeah, they take slaves and they just whip and beat them and murder them and rape them. Yeah, you can't obviously you can't say things like that. That sort of stuff against the rules, big time. So yeah, that's. I mean, if you want to use that as an example, that it's not a very good one. I don't think that any curriculum in this country doesn't overemphasize the importance of slavery at all. I think that that's a wrong-headed view from Dr. Phil, but I also think he's only saying this so he can sound bipartisan. And what he gets into later is a very, very good example.
Involuntary relocation. This was slavery, and we've got people that are wanting to rename schools because people that were doing what were the mores and folkways of the times now would clearly be doing things against the law, certainly against mores and folkways, because they were slave owners at the time, are saying, well, now we have to tear down these statues, we have to rename these schools, and we don't want to teach about them. We have to learn from our mistakes as a society. We can't pretend those things didn't happen. They did happen. They were dark and ugly times in American history. We don't want to pretend those things weren't there.
Okay, so they were dark. They weren't dark and ugly times. I think in many ways, American civilization, American society was a very good place to live. I think that there's an aspect about it that's dark and horrific, which, obviously like objectifying a person and turning them into basically your farm equipment and treating them like your farm equipment is evil. It's an objectification of the human person and a rejection of their human dignity, which is profoundly anti-Catholic. There's a reason that the Catholic Church spoke out against the institution of the transatlantic slave trade and all the bad things that were going on, the kidnappings, the just straight up evil things being done, splitting apart families, all sorts of things like that. Totally evil, totally wrong, and that's a dark aspect of American history. Now, that said, it's a dark aspect of world history. I mean, it was going on all over the world at the time. And what he's saying is absolutely true. Now, the analogy that he's about to give here about speeding, I think, is a very, very good one. But what he's specifically talking about now with like the tearing down of statues and stuff because people are products of their time, I mean, they're not even just doing that. They're actually lying about Christian historical figures like St. Junipero Serra, and saying that these people were, you know, evil colonizers that murdered a bunch of people, or that mistreated and abused indigenous people, this, that, and the other. They started tearing down statues of him, Saint Junipero Serra, in several cities in California, and I think elsewhere as well. And like this guy actually crawled. This guy actually walked from his mission up in California all the way to the capital of Mexico to complain to the Spanish Empire about how soldiers need to stop mistreating indigenous women in the area. So, you know, you have figures that they'll make up bad things about just to tear down our Christian and Western history, because honestly, that's what it's really about. That's what Howard Zinn is really about. That's what all of these things are really about. It's not about, you know, marginalized people groups or any nonsense like that. What it's actually about is tearing down our history and rebuilding it. That's the point. That's why these ideas were injected into American civilization, you know, by Marxists and malicious, nefarious minorities in the country. That want to change fundamentally what America is, because at the end of the day, the majority is Christian, it's Western, it's European. It's like that's the character of the United States, and when you fundamentally change that, when you fundamentally change that, you know, most people wind up unhappy, and a very small number wind up feeling satisfied. I wouldn't even say that they'd be happy. I think the world is a lot better when it's governed by Christians. So anyways, let Dr. Phil give this analogy.
So let me see if I understand, because there's a bunch of stuff. So if I hear you correctly, you're not in agreement with those who want to minimize the tragedy and brutality of slavery, but you also want to keep the school names. If a school is named after a slave owner, you're also okay with that because it will remind us and we will learn from it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. 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 Absolutely. You don't erase history. In fact, you don't even be ashamed of history. You take the bad portions and learn from it while remaining proud of the good that it's done. It's simple. That's what being a patriot means. That's what being a nationalist means. That means loving. That's what loving your country is. And patriotism is a virtue, by the way, guys. It is a virtue.
I think you're oversimplifying what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you're wanting to change American history to pretend that these people did not exist, and you want to measure them by today's yardstick rather than the yardstick at the time, that's what is referred to as presentism.
Yeah.
And that's like saying, okay, you're going to drive through a neighborhood and the speed limit is 20. And you drive through that neighborhood doing 20, and then they come along and say, you know what, we're going to change the speed limit to 10, and we're going to give you a ticket for speeding when the speed limit was 20. It's now 10, but you weren't speeding when you were doing 20, but now it's 10. We're going to give you a retroactive ticket for doing what was acceptable at the time. That's called presentism. We're going to take what was done back at the time, pull it up into the current time, and condemn you for not knowing what was going to be acceptable 200 years later than when you did it. And I think that is really narcissistic and arrogant and rewriting history instead of letting people learn from the mistakes that were made in America and that we need to learn from so we don't make those mistakes again. Because some of those people also did some really good things at the time. We don't need
see, this is exactly what I was saying before. I actually forgot that he had said this in this interview. But yeah, I mean, of course. And we should highlight those good things. We should be proud of those things that they did, instead of blaming people for things that were socially acceptable at the time.
We need to endorse everything they did, but we need to acknowledge the good and the bad.
When it comes to cancel culture, something you've also written and spoken about, what do you think is the prototypical or emblematic example of someone who was unfairly canceled over the last few years?
Well, I think the idea of cancel culture is more than one person, and I'm not going to speak specifically about one person. What I'm